500 guests. Crystal chandeliers throwing diamond light across a ballroom that cost more per evening than most families earn in a year. A woman in a champagne-colored gown, seated at the head table, her hair pinned with her mother's pearls, her wrists thinner than they were 6 months ago, thinner than they should be. She is beautiful in the way that people who are fighting very hard to stay alive are always beautiful. She is smiling. And her husband is at the microphone. "My wife," he said warmly. Like an introduction. Like a gift. "My wife, Catherine. She is many things. Beautiful. Educated. She comes from good stock." He paused. Swirled his drink. And the room, reading the mood wrong, leaned in with him. But let's be honest tonight, among friends, without her mother's billions, Catherine Whitmore would be completely worthless. Worthless. The word did not land like a slap. A slap is over quickly. This landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending rings outward through 500 people who all, in the same instant, held their breath and looked away from the woman at the head table. Catherine Whitmore did not scream. She did not cry. She did not stand. She pressed one hand flat against the tablecloth, white linen, starched and perfect, and she breathed. Because 6 months ago, Catherine Whitmore had been told she had cancer. Stage 3. Aggressive. The kind the doctors talk about carefully, choosing every word. She had been through 4 rounds of chemotherapy. She had lost 20 pounds. She had lost her hair and grown it back and lost it again. She had held a bucket in a hotel bathroom at 3 in the morning and thrown up while her husband slept in the next room, not the room they shared, the guest room, the room he had quietly moved himself into 3 months after the diagnosis. She had survived all of that. She would survive this, too. But across that glittering ballroom, past the ice sculptures and the flower arrangements and the 500 people who were no longer looking at her. One person was. Eleanor Whitmore. 64, silver hair swept back. Pearls. A dark green gown. Completely, unervingly still. Eleanor Whitmore, self-made billionaire. Founder of the Whitmore Group, a real estate and philanthropic empire worth $3.4 billion. The kind of woman who has never needed to raise her voice. Because when Eleanor Whitmore speaks, the room was already quiet before she started. She was looking at her son-in-law with the expression of a woman who has just made a decision. Not an angry decision. A final one. He thought he had married a quiet woman. He had married a Whitmore. And Whitmore women do not break. They build. And then, when necessary, they take apart, brick by brick, everything a small man ever tried to own. This is the story of a woman who was called worthless while she was fighting for her life. And how she became the most powerful person in the room. Stay until the end, because what Eleanor Whitmore says at that second gala will leave you absolutely speechless. And before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Before we go further, I need to say something. Because this story carries a truth that I believe, in my bones, that someone watching right now needs to hear. If you have ever been sick, truly sick, and watched someone you loved step back instead of forward. If you have ever been at your most vulnerable and heard a voice, from inside your own home, tell you that your value was conditional. Then this story is for you. Here is what I know to be true. Your worth is not measured by what your body can do right now. It is not measured by your productivity, your hair, your strength, or your diagnosis. Your worth existed before the illness. It will exist after. It cannot be removed. It can only be forgotten, by people who were never worthy of you to begin with. When someone calls you worthless in a moment of your deepest vulnerability, that is not a judgment. That is a confession. A confession of what they are afraid of. A confession of what they have already decided to abandon. A confession that tells you everything you need to know, if only you are brave enough to believe it. And walking away, or in Catherine's case, being walked away from, is not losing. It is the beginning of the most important thing you will ever build. Yourself. On your own terms. While you are still here to do it. If this story touches something real inside you, I want you to leave a comment. Tell me which moment hits you the hardest. Is it what Eleanor does at the microphone? Is it the letter Catherine writes in the chemo chair? Is it the phone call from an unexpected ally who chooses her daughter-in-law over his own son? Tell me. I read every one. And share this, right now, before you forget, with a woman in your life who is fighting. Who is tired. Who forgot for a moment how strong she actually is. She needs this story more than she knows. Now. Let's go back to that ballroom. The Whitmore Foundation Gala was, by any measure, the most important evening on the city's philanthropic calendar. 500 guests. 3 senators. The mayor. 9 CEOs. 12 figures from the hospital board that the foundation had funded for 16 consecutive years. And at the head table, in a champagne gown that had been chosen carefully, not too elegant, not too diminished, Catherine Whitmore Crane. She was 38 years old. She had been diagnosed with breast cancer 14 months ago. She had finished her most recent round of chemotherapy 11 days before this evening. She looked beautiful. She had worked to look beautiful. The gown was empire-waisted and forgiving. The pearls were her grandmother's. The makeup had taken her friend Audrey 2 full hours, covering what needed to be covered, illuminating what light still lived beneath the surface. She had wanted to cancel. Dominic had insisted she come. You can't miss this, Kath. It's your mother's night. It'll look terrible if you're not there. She had looked at him in the mirror as she fastened her grandmother's pearls and thought, you used to tell me I was brave. You used to hold my hand in the oncology ward and say, we're going to get through this together. You used to mean it. But she had said nothing. Because Catherine Whitmore had learned, through 14 months of doctors and diagnoses and the particular education that serious illness provides, that not every battle is worth fighting on the other person's timetable. Some battles, you wait. You gather your strength. You choose your moment. Her mother had taught her that. Dominic Crane was 42 years old, handsome in a way that had always required maintenance, the right suit, the right haircut, the right room. He had been in finance when Catherine met him. He had moved to a softer, more socially connected role at a smaller firm the year after their wedding, a role, Catherine had later understood, that had been arranged quietly by Eleanor through channels that required no acknowledgement. Eleanor had given him a ladder. He had used it to climb high enough to look down at her daughter. The toast was supposed to be brief. Gracious. A son-in-law honoring his mother-in-law's foundation on its 20th anniversary. He had practiced it. Catherine had heard him in the office, the door half open, the measured, warm cadences of a man who was very good at performing sincerity. But Dominic had been drinking since 4 in the afternoon. And Dominic, when he drank too much, became honest in the way that cowards become honest, loudly, publicly, and always at someone else's expense. Ladies and gentlemen, Eleanor Whitmore. 20 years of this foundation. 20 years of hospitals and schools and literacy programs and, let's be honest, some of the best open bars in the city. Laughter. The comfortable laughter of wealthy people at ease with themselves. And of course, my wife. Catherine. He turned to look at her. And something shifted in his expression. Something that was not warmth. My wife. She's something, isn't she? Beautiful even now. Educated. Accomplished, on paper. A small, uneasy murmur. The faintest ripple. But I want to be honest tonight. Among friends. Among people who know how this world actually works. Catherine's hand found the tablecloth. Her fingers curled into the white linen. Her heart, the one that had kept beating through 4 rounds of chemo, through the nights she had not been sure it would, her heart said, here it comes. Without her mother's money, without Eleanor Whitmore's billions propping her up, my wife would be completely, utterly worthless. The word fell into the ballroom like a stone into very deep water. It went down and down. And every person in that room, every donor, every senator, every woman who had ever sat in a doctor's office and been given a number, felt the weight of it. Catherine Whitmore Crane did not look at her husband. She looked at her mother. Eleanor was at a table near the back, in her dark green gown, her silver hair perfect, her hands folded in her lap over a cream evening bag. She had not moved. She had not flinched. She was looking at Dominic Crane with an expression that Catherine recognized from boardrooms, from contract negotiations, from the particular silence that preceded every decisive move her mother had ever made. Eleanor Whitmore was not angry. She was categorizing. She set down her water glass. She smoothed her napkin. She stood. Every head in the room turned toward her. Not because she called for their attention. Because Eleanor Whitmore, standing up in a room, was an event. She walked toward the podium. Unhurried. Each step measured on the marble floor, the quiet authority of a woman who has never needed to rush. Dominic saw her coming. His smile faltered. Just barely. Just enough. Eleanor reached the stage. Climbed the 3 steps. Stood beside her son-in-law. She was 5'4". He was 6'1". She took up all the space. She reached out, gently, almost tenderly, and took the microphone from his hand. The way you take a toy from a child who doesn't understand what they're holding. Not angry. Simply certain. My son-in-law, she said, and her voice was warm and conversational and carried to every corner of the room without effort, has called my daughter worthless. She paused. Let the word settle. Let all 500 people sit with it for 1 breath, 2 breaths. An interesting observation from a man whose entire professional existence was built on a foundation I quietly laid 11 years ago. A murmur. Sharp. Involuntary. But we'll address that privately. Tonight is about something more important. She turned to face the room, 500 faces, all of them hers now, not his. Tonight is about a woman who has spent the last 14 months fighting for her life with more grace, more courage, and more dignity than most of us will be asked to summon in an entire lifetime. My daughter has sat in chemotherapy chairs and run foundation meetings by phone from the hospital bed. She has made decisions that protected this organization, these programs, and the 12,000 children they serve, while being told, again and again, that her body might not cooperate. Eleanor's voice did not waver. Not 1 syllable. She is not worthless. She is worth more than everything in this room combined. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure every single person understands that. She reached into her evening bag. Produced a folded check. Held it up. $2 million, additional, tonight, for the Cancer Care and Survivorship Wing. In my daughter's name. The room erupted. Standing ovation. Pure, unperformed, genuine. Eleanor handed the microphone to the event coordinator, smoothed her gown, walked back to her table. She did not look at Dominic again. She had already moved past him, the way you move past furniture you have decided to donate. Dominic stood on the stage alone. The spotlight on him. The applause for someone else. Catherine Whitmore Crane sat at the head table with both hands flat on the white linen, feeling her own heartbeat, strong, steady, present, and thought. She knew. My mother knew before I did. She's been waiting for this moment. But here is what Dominic didn't know. Catherine had already found the folder. The one in the locked compartment of his car. The one that would change everything, not just for her, but for Eleanor's foundation, for his firm, for a predatory network that had been circling the Whitmore group for 3 years. Stay with me. We're just getting started. The tile was cold through the fabric. Good. She needed cold. She needed something real and immediate and undeniable. She pressed one hand against the stall wall. Breathed. In through her nose, 4 counts. Out through her mouth, 4 counts. The breathing her oncologist had taught her, the breathing she had used in the worst moments, the biopsy, the first treatment, the night she had sat in the hospital parking garage for 40 minutes because she could not make herself go back inside. The breathing worked. It always worked. Her body knew how to survive. It had been proving that for 14 months. She pulled out her phone. Opened the text thread from that morning. 9:22 a.m. Dominic. A photo of her, asleep. Morning light. Her short hair, growing back from the last round, silver and dark at the roots, soft as something new. His caption, "You look beautiful. Tonight is going to be incredible." She read it 3 times. Lock. Unlock. Read. Lock. Unlock. Read. As if repetition could explain the distance between the man who sent the text and the man at the podium. She had been explaining that distance for a long time. He's stressed about work. He's afraid of losing me and doesn't know how to show it. He handles fear with distance, it's a pattern from his childhood. She had been very good at explaining. She had been a better explainer than she had been a defender of herself. She stood. Smoothed her gown. Washed her hands, because that is what you do. Checked her reflection. Same face. Same pearls. Same woman who had walked into this ballroom believing, if not fully, then partially, with the specific hope of someone who is not sure they can afford to stop hoping, that her husband loved her. She stepped into the hallway. And froze. 15 feet away, near the coat check. Dominic. His back to her. His hand on the lower back of a woman Catherine had never seen. Young. Dark hair. Laughing at something he said. The hand. It wasn't placed there. It was resting there. The way a hand rests somewhere it has rested before. The ease of repetition. Of comfort. Of history that Catherine was not part of. Dominic leaned down to say something near the woman's ear. The woman laughed. It was a specific laugh. The laugh of someone receiving a private gift. Catherine stepped back into the shadow of the hallway. She watched for 4 seconds. 5. Then she turned and walked away. Her heels made no sound on the carpet. She was very good at leaving rooms quietly. She had had a lot of practice. 12 minutes home. The rain had started, of course it had, and the windshield wipers cut their rhythm back and forth, in a beat that matched the words still moving through the architecture of her chest. Worthless. 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 Dominic drove. He was not drunk. He was the careful, controlled version of himself, the one that appeared when he had done something that required management. You're quiet, he said. She watched a raindrop trace a line down the passenger window. It caught the streetlights as it fell and turned gold for a moment before vanishing. It was a bad joke. I'd had too much. I'll call your mother tomorrow. Catherine turned to look at him. Really look at him. The way you look at a painting once you understand it has been altered, the brushstrokes are familiar, the colors are right, but the hand that painted the recent sections was not the same hand. Who was she? The car didn't swerve. His hands on the wheel didn't tighten. He was very good. Who was who? The woman at the coat check. Your hand on her back. A beat. A colleague. Sabrina something. We were talking about a deal. It was a loud room. You were whispering in her ear. Kath. He used her full name. He only used her full name when he needed her to feel irrational. It was a loud room. That's how people communicate in loud rooms. Can we not do this? You just had treatment 11 days ago. You need to rest, not create. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. He reached for it. Turned it face down. One motion. Practiced. Work email, he said. They pulled into the driveway. He reached over. Squeezed her hand. His hand was warm. His expression was concerned. He looked exactly like the man she had married. I'm sorry about tonight. I really am. I'll call Eleanor in the morning. She looked at his face for a long moment. She said nothing. She went inside. She had believed that, too. For a while. She stood in the kitchen, the overhead light too bright, the refrigerator humming its indifferent hum. And then she walked to his home office. She wasn't sure why. Instinct, maybe. The particular radar that cancer had sharpened in her, the ability to sense what was real and what was performance, because she no longer had the energy to waste on things that weren't true. His desk was immaculate. Dominic controlled his environment the way controlling people always did, precisely, completely, as if order on the outside could contain the disorder within. Top drawer. Unlocked. Pens, cards, a spare phone charger. Second drawer. Locked. She went to the hall closet. Found his jacket from that evening. In the inside pocket, a small flat key she had never seen. How long had that drawer been locked? How long had she not noticed? Key. Lock. Click. Inside, credit card statements. Not the card they shared. A separate card. A statement she had never received, addressed to a P.O. box she didn't recognize. Dinners for two. At every restaurant he had told her was a client meeting. A jewelry receipt. $4,800. A bracelet. Catherine had never received a bracelet. A hotel charge. The Remington. March 14th. The night he had told her he was in Chicago for a conference. She pulled up the hotel's address on her phone. 14 miles from their house. He hadn't gone to Chicago. He had gone 14 miles and lied about 1,000. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where, 18 months ago, she had told him about the diagnosis, watching his face, looking for the anchor of someone who would hold her, and she spread the statements under the overhead light and read every line. The statements went back 22 months. The affair had started 4 months before her diagnosis. He had been building this other life while she was still whole. While she was still, by any measure that he apparently used, worth something. She pressed her palms flat on the table. Felt the wood under her hands. Solid. Honest. Something she could trust. Okay, she whispered. Not to anyone. Not yet. Just, okay. Because sometimes okay is not a statement of fact. It is a decision to keep your hands on the table and your eyes open when everything in you wants to collapse. She picked up her phone and called her mother. And Eleanor Whitmore answered on the first ring. Not because she had been waiting. Because Eleanor Whitmore did not sleep when her daughter was in pain. What happened next, the 3 phone calls Eleanor made before dawn, the forensic accountant she had on retainer, the private investigator's report that had already been sitting in her office for 6 weeks, that is where this story truly begins. Eleanor Whitmore had not slept. Not because she was distressed, distress was an indulgence she had long ago declined to afford, but because there was work to do and the hours before sunrise were the clearest thinking hours she had. She had built her company in the early mornings, before the rest of the world arrived to complicate things. She would dismantle Dominic Crane the same way. Catherine arrived at the estate at 7:30. She let herself in through the kitchen door, she had never needed to knock, and found her mother in the study. The room had not changed in 30 years. Bookshelves floor to ceiling. A mahogany desk that had belonged to Eleanor's own mother, a woman who had cleaned houses for a living and saved for 11 years to buy her daughter a small plot of land in Connecticut. A grandfather clock in the corner, ticking its steady, patient rhythm. Order. History. Permanence. Everything Dominic had tried to make her feel she didn't deserve. Catherine sat in the leather chair opposite the desk, the one she had sat in since she was 4 years old, the one her feet hadn't reached the floor from for the first decade of her memory, and placed the credit card statements on the desk. Eleanor put on her reading glasses. Read each page. She didn't react. Her face was stone. She read the way she read contracts, methodically, completely, building a case in real time. When she finished, she folded her glasses, set them on the desk, aligned them with the edge. A habit. The need for order when everything else is not. What do you want to do? Not what she should do. Not what Eleanor would do. What Catherine wanted. This was how Eleanor had always parented, she gave her daughter the tools and the space and then she waited. Even now. Especially now. I don't know yet, Catherine said. Then we take our time. There is no urgency in decisions made well. The clock ticked. Rain began outside, the soft, steady kind. Catherine closed her eyes and let the room hold her the way it always had. He's been having an affair, she said. The words felt strange in her mouth. Clinical. As if she were reporting a symptom. At least 2 years. Maybe longer. I found statements. I know, Eleanor said quietly. Catherine opened her eyes. You know. I suspected, 8 months ago. I had someone look. I didn't want to tell you while you were in treatment, I wasn't going to give you that weight while your body was doing the hardest thing it's ever done. A pause. I'm sorry I was right. They sat with that. The clock ticked. The rain increased. And then Eleanor said, very quietly. There is more. But I want you to hear it from the accountant. Not from me. You need to see the numbers yourself. Her name was Margaret Holloway. She was 57 years old, silver-haired, and had spent 30 years finding money that men had tried to make invisible. She sat across from Eleanor and Catherine in the office of Russell Pemberton, the Whitmore Group's attorney, and she laid out 26 months of Dominic Crane's financial life on a conference table. Your husband has been systematic, Margaret said. There was no judgment in her voice. Just the tone of someone presenting facts. Over 22 months, he has made 137 separate transfers from your joint household account to a personal account you are not named on. Each transfer was under $2,500. Small enough to avoid triggering alerts. The total is $94,200. Catherine looked at the spreadsheet. Each number was a night she thought they were building something. Each number was a lie with a dollar amount attached. But that's not the most significant item, Margaret continued. She slid a second document across the table. 8 months ago, your husband borrowed $350,000 from a man named Victor Hale. Hale is a predatory lender who specifically targets men who are financially exposed and married into significant wealth. The loan paperwork lists your husband's quote, expected financial inheritance through marriage, as collateral. Russell leaned forward. Victor Hale has done this 11 times in the past decade. He finds leveraged men married to wealthy women. He lends to them at impossible rates. When they default, and they always default, he uses the co-guarantee documents to pursue claims against the family wealth. And there is a co-guarantee document attached to this loan, Margaret said. She placed it in front of Catherine. It bears your signature. It claims you agreed to pledge Whitmore Group assets as security. Catherine picked up the page. Her name. Her handwriting. Except it wasn't. The W was wrong. Catherine's W had a distinctive double peak. This one was flat. Close enough for a stranger. Not close enough for the woman whose name it was. I didn't sign this. We know, Russell said. That is forgery. Federal offense. Catherine stood. Walked to the window. 14 floors below, the city moved in its ordinary way, people and coffee and phones and purpose. Normal. Uncomplicated. She pressed her fingertips against the glass. He hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been building a case. She thought of the medical appointments he had attended and then recounted incorrectly to friends. She cried the whole drive home, she's really struggling, I'm worried about her state of mind. She thought of the medication log she'd once found on his phone, her prescriptions, her dosages, dates and side effects, documented the way you document evidence, not the way a husband documents care. He had been building a record of her as fragile, unstable, dependent. Preparing the ground. Using her illness as a weapon. The anger that moved through her then was not hot. It was cold. The particular cold of something that has been compressed into diamond. Hard. Clear. Permanent. What do we do? Eleanor, who had been silent throughout the presentation, folded her hands. She had been listening the way she listened in negotiations, completely, carefully, building the architecture of the response in real time. She took out her phone. Made 3 calls. The first was to Russell, file everything, seal it, asset protection, criminal referral. The second was to Margaret, full trace on Hale's network, every entity, every previous victim. The third she took in the hallway. Catherine didn't hear it. When Eleanor returned, she sat back down. Her expression hadn't changed. But something in her eyes had, a particular sharpening, the look of a woman who has identified a problem and already engineered the solution. He made one mistake, Eleanor said. He forgot whose daughter you are. She paused. There will be a second gala. In 3 weeks. The hospital fundraiser, the cancer care wing dedication. Every significant person in this city will attend. And that is where Dominic Crane will learn what worthless actually means. Catherine looked at her mother. At the steady hands, the composed face, the eyes that had looked at this world for 64 years and had never once flinched from what they found there. Okay, Catherine said. And this time the word was not survival. It was a strategy. But before the second gala, before Eleanor walks to that microphone and says the 4 words that will bring a room of 500 people to tears, Catherine receives an unexpected package. No return address. Photographs she never asked for, taken by someone she never knew was watching. And the name of the person who sent them? It will break your heart in the best possible way. Audrey Marsh stood on the porch with mascara on her cheekbones and rain in her hair, shaking slightly, the way people shake when they have been holding something in for too long. She had been Catherine's best friend for 18 years. She had done Catherine's makeup for the gala. She had known, for 3 months, what she was covering up. I need to tell you everything, Audrey said. All of it. Even the parts you're going to hate me for. Catherine opened the door. Because this is what you do with people who owe you truth, you let them in. They sat on the kitchen floor, 2 women in their late 30s on cold tile, Audrey with mascara tracking down her face, Catherine in the gray hoodie she wore after treatments, the one that was so soft it felt like being held. 4 months ago, Audrey said. I was having dinner at Maison Juillet. I saw them. Dominic and a woman. They were at a corner table. His hand was on hers, not on top, threaded through. The way you hold someone you've held before. Catherine's jaw tightened. She said nothing. I left before they saw me. Walked outside. Stood in the cold for 20 minutes. And then I went home. I told myself I needed to be sure. I told myself you were in the middle of treatment and the timing was. He came to see me the next week, Audrey continued. He knew I'd been there. He said it was ending. He said you were fragile and that knowing would, he said it could affect your immune response. He actually said that. He used your treatment against me. Catherine looked at her friend. The mascara trails. The shaking hands. The genuine, ragged guilt of someone who had made the wrong call for what she believed were the right reasons. And you believed him. I wanted to. And I was afraid. Not for you, for me. For this look. The one you have right now. I was a coward, Kath. I have no other word for it. I chose the easy path and called it protecting you. But I was protecting myself. The refrigerator hummed. The rain tapped the window. I know, Catherine said finally. I understand why you did it. I believe you thought you were protecting me. But understanding isn't the same as trust. And trust is going to take a long time. Audrey nodded. Eyes wet. Hands still. I'm not ready to call you my best friend right now. But I'm ready to call you my friend. And I'm ready for you to help me, not for the marriage. That's already over. For the fight. Something shifted in Audrey's eyes. Purpose. The particular energy of a woman who has been given a chance to be brave, finally, properly, genuinely brave, and intends to take it. Audrey Marsh, it turned out, knew absolutely everyone. As a society event planner, she had access to a network of bartenders, caterers, coordinators, and wives who noticed things that powerful men assumed went unobserved. Within 48 hours, she had a complete profile of Sabrina Wells, 27, associate at Dominic's firm, who had told 3 separate colleagues she expected to be engaged by spring. She had been photographed in 5 of the restaurants that appeared on the secret credit card statements. She had no idea that the Whitmore Group's assets were held in an irrevocable family trust that Dominic had zero claim to. She thought she was marrying into billions. She was, as Audrey put it with a precision that Catherine almost smiled at, marrying into debt and fraud charges. Inside the plain brown package, photographs. Dominic and Sabrina at restaurants. In a parking garage. Walking into the Remington Hotel. Each image time-stamped. Clear. Irrefutable. The photographs went back 23 months. The affair had predated the diagnosis by 9 months. At the bottom of the stack, a typed note on plain paper. 6 words. He does not deserve you. Everything you need is here. No signature. Russell traced it within a week. The private investigator was licensed in Ohio. His client had paid in personal checks. The checks were drawn on an account belonging to Warren Crane. Dominic's father. Warren Crane was 68 years old. He ran a 2-bay auto repair shop in Columbus, Ohio. He had raised Dominic alone after Dominic's mother left when the boy was 11. He wore flannel shirts and work boots and had hands that carried the permanent evidence of 40 years of honest work. He had spent his savings, money set aside for a new hydraulic lift for the shop, on a private investigator. To document his son's betrayal. To protect a daughter-in-law he had met 6 times. Because it was the right thing to do. Catherine called him that evening, sitting on the porch as the October light turned the maple tree to amber. I got your photographs, Warren. Silence. And then, a sound she hadn't expected. A grown man, crying. Quietly. The way men of his generation cry, suppressed, almost ashamed, but unable to stop. I raised him better than this. I thought I did. He told her about Dominic's mother leaving. About working doubles. About sitting in the front row of every school event for a boy who grew up and learned, somewhere along the way, that people were resources rather than gifts. When he brought that girl to meet me last year and introduced her as a colleague, I recognized the look on her face. The same look his mother used to have when she was looking at something she wanted more than what she had. He paused. I hired the investigator in April. Used the money I'd been saving for the shop. Don't need new equipment as much as I need to be able to live with myself. If you need me in court, against my own son, whatever it takes, I'll be there. Catherine pressed her palm flat against her sternum. Her heart beating there. Strong and steady. Thank you, Warren. You don't need to thank me. Somebody had to be the man my son refused to be. In the 3 weeks between the gala and the cancer care wing dedication, Catherine Whitmore Crane became the most organized she had ever been. Not because organization came naturally in the aftermath of betrayal, it did not. The nights were long. The chemo that continued through all of this was indifferent to her schedule. But she organized anyway. Because the thing about fighting for your life is that it teaches you what is worth your energy and what is not. Grief was not worth it. Strategy was. Russell filed the divorce petition under seal. Not served yet. Timed. Margaret froze the joint accounts, restricting Dominic's access in increments small enough to create confusion but not alarm. The criminal referral for forgery and wire fraud moved through the federal prosecutor's office. 2 independent handwriting experts confirmed the forged signature. Both agreed to testify. Victor Hale's network was flagged with the Financial Crimes Division. His organization, it emerged, had victimized 9 other families over 14 years. The Crane loan was the thread that began to unravel the entire operation. 3 days before the gala, Dominic's credit card was declined at lunch. Audrey was at the restaurant, 2 tables away. Not a coincidence. He came home that evening agitated but performing calm. Checking his phone. Opening his laptop, closing it. The small, barely visible signs of a man who has felt the ground shift and cannot identify the cause. Everything okay? Catherine asked from the kitchen, warm, unconcerned. Fine. Some bank thing. Security review. I'm sure it's nothing. She dried a dish, placed it in the cabinet, aligned it with the others, and smiled. She had been looking at this face in mirrors for 14 months. She had watched it change. The hair falling, the color going, the thinness settling into the cheekbones and the hollows beneath the eyes. She had watched it come back. Slowly, imperfectly, the way things come back after they've been through something real. She looked at it now. Really looked. Not through Dominic's eyes, the eyes that had, apparently, for years now, been measuring her worth against his needs. Not through the oncology ward's fluorescent lighting and the cool clinical language of staging and prognosis. Through her own eyes. The woman in the mirror was tired. The woman in the mirror was fierce. The woman in the mirror was still here. There you are, she whispered. I've been looking for you. She went to the small writing desk in the corner of the bedroom, her desk, one of the few pieces of furniture in this house that had never been subject to negotiation, and she took out the stationery her mother had given her years ago. Cream. Embossed at the top with a small W. She had been saving it. Not knowing what for. She knew now. She wrote for an hour. Not a letter to her future child, there was no child. Just her, alone, and the honest truth of who she had been and who she had decided to become. A letter to herself. To the version of herself she had been before the diagnosis, before the marriage became a management project, before she had learned to make herself smaller to fit inside someone else's comfort. She wrote, "You are not defined by what your body is doing right now. You are not defined by what he needed you to believe. You were worth something before you were sick, and you are worth something now, and the worth was always yours, it was never his to grant or remove. You come from women who transform. Your grandmother, who built a business from a kitchen table. Your mother, who turned a plot of land and a $20,000 loan into a foundation that has given 30,000 children a fighting chance. And you, who sat in a chemo chair and ran board meetings and raised $2 million for a hospital wing and did not, even once, stop believing this was worth surviving for." She folded the letter. Put it in the cream envelope. Sealed it. Wrote on the front, "For the woman I am becoming." Put it in the drawer of her desk. Tomorrow, she thought, is the last night of the life I have been living. After tomorrow, I begin the one I was supposed to have. She chose the deep blue dress. Eleanor arrived at 10. She stood behind her daughter at the mirror and clasped a necklace at her throat, a cascade of small diamonds that had belonged to Eleanor's mother, the woman who had cleaned houses and saved for 11 years to change her family's story. My mother wore this the day she decided to stop apologizing for what she wanted, Eleanor said, meeting her daughter's eyes in the mirror. Whitmore women don't break, Catherine. We build. And when someone tries to take what we built, we remind them, very clearly, very publicly, of exactly who they are dealing with. Catherine looked at her reflection. At her mother behind her, the pearls, the composed face, the 64 years of building. At herself, still thin, still marked by the treatment, still in the middle of the fight, but different now. Upright. Something in the spine that had not been there before. She was ready. The Cancer Care Wing dedication. The night the hospital would announce the Whitmore Foundation's largest single gift in its 20-year history. Eleanor had expanded the invitation list 3 weeks ago. She wanted witnesses. Catherine arrived at 6:45. She walked into the ballroom with her head high and her hand resting lightly at her side, not performing health, not performing strength, simply present. Simply herself. Eleanor was already there, near the podium, reviewing notes with the event coordinator. She looked up when Catherine entered. Their eyes met across the room. One nod. Small. Complete. Russell Pemberton sat at the head table, looking like any other guest. The thin briefcase at his feet said otherwise. Audrey was near the bar, dressed in black, watching the entrance with the particular attention of a woman running an operation. Through the service door, a man in a dark suit stood patiently. Folded document in his inside pocket. Professional. Still. Dominic arrived at 7:10. He wore his best suit, his most confident smile. He had no idea this was the last night of the life he had been building at everyone else's expense. He walked to Catherine. Kissed her cheek. Put his hand briefly on her shoulder, the gesture of a man marking territory in front of witnesses. You look incredible, he said. And for a moment, a strange, unbearable moment, it sounded almost true. As if some very old part of him, buried under 22 months of lies and calculated cruelty, still recognized who she was. Catherine smiled. Thank you. It's going to be a remarkable evening. She moved the way she always moved, unhurried, certain, as if the room were already listening before she arrived to confirm it. She adjusted the microphone. Surveyed the room. 600 faces looking up at her. Good evening, she said. Warm. Steady. The voice of a woman who has addressed rooms like this for 40 years and has never once needed to raise it. Thank you for being here. Tonight, we announce the completion of funding for the Cancer Care and Survivorship Wing at Meridian Hospital. Every dollar raised tonight goes directly to care. Nothing overhead. Nothing administrative. To the patients, the nurses, the doctors, and the families who sit in those waiting rooms and need to know that someone, somewhere, decided they were worth fighting for. Applause. Genuine. The room was hers. Completely. She spoke for 9 minutes about the foundation's work. Numbers. Impact. Stories. A 12-year-old girl who had received a second round of treatment because the foundation covered what insurance refused. A 41-year-old man who had been in remission for 3 years because an early detection program the foundation funded had caught his cancer before it advanced. A woman, 73, who had written a letter to the foundation that ended with the words, "I didn't think I was worth saving. Your program told me I was." That changed everything. The room had gone soft with it. The particular quality of attention that only arrives when people are being moved. Eleanor paused. Set down her notes. Removed her reading glasses, folded them, placed them in her evening bag. The room noticed. 600 people leaned forward by a fraction. Eleanor Whitmore setting down her notes meant something was happening. Before I continue, she said, I'd like to share something personal. The room waited. 3 weeks ago, at the Foundation's annual gala, my son-in-law stood at this podium and called my daughter worthless. Silence. Hard. Complete. He said it in front of 500 people. He said it about a woman who, at that moment, was 22 months into a fight that most of us would not have the courage to wage. He said it with a glass of bourbon in his hand and the casual confidence of someone who had spent a long time believing he was safe. Eleanor's voice had not risen. It had, if anything, dropped. Lower. Quieter. More devastating. I'd like to speak to that word tonight. Worthless. I'd like to tell you what it actually means. She pressed a button at the podium. Behind her, a large screen illuminated. Worthless is forging your wife's signature on a $350,000 loan from a predatory lender, while your wife is in chemotherapy. While she is fighting to stay alive. The forged co-guarantee filled the screen. The handwriting expert's annotations in red. Catherine's name, angular and wrong. Dominic stood up. His chair scraped the floor, the sound of it sharp through the silence. Wait. Eleanor continued as if he hadn't spoken. Worthless is siphoning $94,000 from your joint household account over 22 months. 137 transfers. Small enough, each one, to avoid the alert. Large enough, together, to fund a life she was not part of. The spreadsheet. 600 people reading it in real time. Worthless is documenting your wife's pain, her treatment side effects, her bad nights, her crying in the car on the way home from the oncology ward, and labeling the file, see health and stability notes. Building a record. Preparing a narrative. Planning to use her illness against her in court. The document appeared on screen. Dominic's own words. His own dates. His wife's most private moments, catalogued as ammunition. 600 people did not move. Dominic's face had gone from white to something beyond white. He looked at the screen. At the room. At the 500 additional people who were now reading his private calculations about his sick wife's emotional state. And worthless, Eleanor said, and straightened to her full height, is bringing your mistress to your wife's cancer care benefit. Seating her 3 tables away. While your wife sits at the head table having survived 4 rounds of chemotherapy. And thinking, somehow, that this is a thing you deserve to do. Every head in the room turned. 3 tables over, a young woman in a green dress sat very still, a wine glass in her hand, color draining from her face in stages. Eleanor turned to face Dominic directly. She looked at him the way she had looked at him from across the first Gala ballroom, categorically, finally, without anger, because anger would have been too much honor. You married my daughter and believed you had married her worth. You were incorrect. Catherine's worth has never had anything to do with me. She has run this foundation's programs through treatment. She has personally raised $480,000 for children's hospitals this year. She has sat in chemotherapy chairs and made decisions that protected 12,000 children she will never meet. She has done all of this while you were documenting her tears. She paused. One breath. Catherine Whitmore is the most valuable person in this room. And then the 4 words. Quiet. Final. You are not welcome. The service door opened. The man in the dark suit stepped forward. Dominic Arthur Crane. I'm United States Marshal James Holt. I'm serving you with a divorce petition, a temporary restraining order, and a federal summons to appear on charges of forgery and wire fraud. The papers. Dominic's hands. Shaking. The papers rattled, the sound of 600 people watching a man's carefully maintained life dismantle in real time. Catherine sat at the head table. She did not stand, did not speak, did not perform anything. She placed both hands flat on the white linen tablecloth. Felt the solid reality of the table beneath her palms. Breathed. In through her nose, 4 counts. Out through her mouth, 4 counts. The breathing that had held her through the worst nights. The breathing that had never once failed her. Dominic was escorted out by the marshal and 2 hotel security officers. He did not look at Catherine. He did not look at anyone. He walked out with the papers in his hands and 600 people's silence on his back. The doors closed. Eleanor returned to the microphone. My apologies for the interruption, she said, and smiled, the real smile, the warm one. Now. Where were we? Ah, yes. The children. The gala continued. Because Eleanor Whitmore did not allow anyone, especially not Dominic Crane, to take time away from sick children. The donations that evening totaled $3.1 million. The highest single-night total in the foundation's history. Every person in that room had just watched a woman be defended by someone who loved her. And they had reached into their pockets accordingly. She breathed. Really breathed. The kind of breath that doesn't count as one of the 4, the kind that fills you so completely it aches, and then releases, and then you understand for one clear moment exactly how much space you are allowed to take up. Footsteps behind her. She turned. James Whitfield stood in the doorway to the terrace. He worked for the foundation, had for 7 years, running the research and impact division. He was steady in the way that very competent, unassuming people are steady, by doing excellent work and not requiring acknowledgement. He held a glass of water. Not champagne. Water. Thought you might need this, he said. She took it. Drank. Felt the cold trace a line through her chest. Are you okay? Catherine looked at the city. At the lights and the dark spaces between them and the 3 stars visible above the light pollution. I thought I'd feel triumphant, she said. I thought I'd feel vindicated. But I just feel. She found the word. Empty. But the good kind. The kind that comes after you've put something down that was very heavy. James nodded. He didn't offer anything else. He just stood beside her and let the word settle, the way good people do when they understand that presence is more important than commentary. I think I'm going to be okay, Catherine said. And for the first time in 14 months, she believed it without qualification. Dominic was gone. Physically, legally, completely gone. Court order. Within 48 hours of the gala. His belongings had been packed by a moving service, the suits, the carefully curated books, the cologne that had always smelled like someone else's story, and sent to a storage unit. He was in a corporate apartment on the East Side, facing forgery charges and wire fraud, his firm having terminated him within 3 business days of the federal summons becoming public record. Victor Hale's operation was under full federal investigation. 8 other families had come forward. The thread Dominic had provided had unraveled an entire network. The prosecutors, Russell said, were grateful. That did not help Dominic. Sabrina Wells had transferred to a regional office within a week of the gala. It turned out that planning to be Mrs. Crane by spring looked different when Mrs. Crane came with indictment papers rather than billions. Catherine sipped her tea. She had switched to herbal, the chemo continued, would continue for another 4 months, and caffeine made the nights harder. She watched the leaves fall. Gold against the October light. She felt nothing in particular. Not sadness. Not relief. Not triumph. Just the particular stillness that comes after a long storm, when the wind is finally quiet and the air smells clean and the world is just there, wet and honest and ready to begin again. The doorbell rang. Warren Crane stood on her porch in a pressed flannel shirt, the nicest one he owned, she guessed. Work boots polished. He held a Tupperware container in one hand and a paper bag in the other. Drove 12 hours, he said. Might have gotten a ticket somewhere in West Virginia. Haven't checked. She opened the door wider. Come in, Warren. He sat at her kitchen table and placed the Tupperware between them. My mother's soup. She made it whenever things went wrong. It's not a cure for anything. But it's warm. From the bag, he produced a small framed photograph. Black and white. A woman at a kitchen table, leaning over something she was writing, lamplight on her face. My mother, Warren said. She built a bakery from her living room in 1971. 3 kids, no money, no business experience. Just a kitchen and the refusal to believe her situation was permanent. I thought maybe you could use a picture like that on your desk. A reminder. Catherine held the photograph. The woman's face, focused, present, absolutely certain. Thank you, Warren. You didn't have to come. Yes, I did. Someone had to be the Crane who showed up right. Dear Catherine. By the time you read this, you'll know whether the treatment worked. You'll know whether the fighting was worth it in the clinical sense, the numbers, the scans, the language the doctors use carefully. But here is what I want you to know regardless of what those numbers say. You were not worthless when you were strong. You were not worthless when you were sick. You were not worthless when you were loved. You were not worthless when you were betrayed. You are not the sum of what you have survived. You are not the sum of what was done to you. You are the woman who sat in a chemo chair and ran board meetings by phone. You are the woman who pressed her palms flat on a kitchen table at 1 a.m. and said okay, when okay was the bravest word available. You are the woman whose mother walked to a podium and told 600 people exactly what love looks like when it refuses to be quiet. You come from women who transform. You are already one of them. Welcome to what comes next. The reports. The budgets. The impact assessments. 12,000 children served. 47 new hospital partnerships. A survivorship program that had enrolled 300 patients in its first year. This was what her hands had built. This was what she had been told, by a man who feared her value, that she was somehow insufficient to do. James Whitfield knocked on her open door at 10 with a cup of tea. Herbal. 1 honey. Without being asked. The hospital board wants to name the new wing, he said. They're asking your preference. The Whitmore family wing, Catherine said immediately. Not my name. Not my mother's. The whole family. Including the ones who are gone and the ones who are still here. That's what this is about. James smiled. He lingered a moment in the doorway, comfortably, the way someone lingers in a place they're glad to be in. For what it's worth, I think worthless is the last word anyone in this city would use for you. Especially after last month. Catherine looked up. His eyes were direct and kind and completely unperformative. Thank you, James. He nodded. Turned to go. Oh, the quarterly report. You misspelled survivorship on page 4. I already fixed it. She laughed. A real one. The kind that comes from somewhere unexpected and shakes loose something you didn't know you were holding. Of course you did, she said. She looked at the Grand Callaway Hotel through the car window as she passed. The same stone facade. The same brass doors. The same awning in gold script. She didn't flinch. Didn't feel the familiar tightening. She just saw a building. A place where something happened. Not a monument. Not a wound. Just a place she had survived and moved past, the way you move past most things when you are still, against all expectations, here. She kept driving. The woman who had walked into that ballroom 4 weeks ago would not recognize the woman driving past it now. Same face. Same pearls. Same treatment schedule. But a different spine. Upright. Unaccountable to the wrong opinions. Made of something that hadn't existed before the worst months, and couldn't be removed now. People ask me if I'm angry. I was. God, I was. The kind of anger that doesn't sleep. That replays every carefully performed concern at every oncology appointment and translates it correctly, finally, into what it was. But anger was expensive. It cost energy I needed. So I traded it for something better. Clarity. Clarity is what you have when the anger burns long enough to burn itself clean. Rage makes you swing. Clarity makes you aim. And I had very good teachers. This story carries a truth that I believe, in the deepest part of me, that many of you needed to hear today. Your worth is not contingent on your health. It is not granted by the person beside you and it cannot be revoked when they decide they need to diminish you to make themselves feel larger. Your worth existed before the diagnosis. Before the betrayal. Before the word they chose in a ballroom in front of everyone you know. It exists now. It will exist after. It is the most durable thing you own. When someone calls you worthless in your most vulnerable moment, they are not making an observation. They are making a confession. A confession that they have found the limit of what they can offer. A confession that they are afraid. A confession that tells you, if you are brave enough to hear it, exactly where the door is. And walking through that door is not losing. It is the beginning of the story that was always supposed to be yours. If this story touched something real in you, I want you to leave a comment right now. Tell me which moment moved you most. Was it Eleanor at the microphone? Was it Warren driving 12 hours with soup and a photograph? Was it the letter Catherine wrote to herself, the one that begins and ends with, "You are still here"? Tell me. I read every single one. And share this, right now, before you scroll on, with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who is fighting. Someone who is tired. Someone who forgot, just for a moment, how much they are worth. They need this story. Please don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe for more timeless stories that will touch your heart and keep you thinking long after the video ends. Every week, we bring you stories about people who rise, from the worst things that have happened to them, and become, because of those things, exactly who they were meant to be. Make sure you're here for the next one.